the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by John Brown, supported by Romano. Please vote.
Yeah, press the button. You can't push my button. You might. Might. Okay. Sorry. For some reason it's just not.
Motion passes 11-0. Approval of the minutes dated October 3rd, 2019. Moved by Haas, supported by Sager. Please vote. Motion passes 11-0. Public participation. Does anyone wish to be heard? Anyone wish to be heard? Seeing none, we'll close public participation. Presentations, proposed budget, and we will have the Director of Finance, Mr. Spiegel.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Good to see you as always. You should have on your iPads and on a hard copy about a 27-page PowerPoint presentation on the 2020 budget. I'm going to try to keep my comments to about 15 to 20 minutes if I can. May go a little bit longer, so I may skip over some of the graphs and things of that nature. I will repeat several times during this presentation that 2020 isn't necessarily of much concern, even though we're budgeting in the red. It's 21 and 22, and that's because of what all the experts are saying about an impending recession coming in late 20 or early 21. So we'll get into a little more detail about that as we go along. Overall, 30,000 foot view. Total budget of across all funds is $816 million. That's an increase of about 0.7% from the 19 amended number. Again, much as I did last year, I would temper that comment with each fund needs to be analyzed individually because you have certain things going on in certain funds where the 2020 budget is less than the 2019 budget because you might have a 3-year grant, for example, in Homeland Security grants, where you've spent down a third of the money, so the budget looks like it's going down because it's just carrying forward money, but that's meant to happen, for example. We have a decrease of about $8 million in capital projects in the general fund. We've pushed projects off to 2021. So there's some decrease going on there that if you look at individual departments, it isn't necessarily as much of a decrease as it is increases. We've built in a 3.5% property tax increase into 2020. That's based on what's happening in the market now. As you know, there's 2 factors that go into taxable value increases. There's an inflationary factor and then new growth. The inflationary factor we think is going to come in at about 1.9 or 2%. We've been tracking that number monthly. We don't have the September numbers yet, but about 1.9 through the end of August. And again, that time frame is October of one year through September of the next. That's the 12-month period the state uses to define and determine what the inflationary impact is. And any other increase would be growth. So if we get a 1.5 growth and all that sort of thing, then we should hit our 3.5%. We budgeted a 2% increase in 21 and a 1% increase in 22. Again, sort of anticipating a slowdown and a recession hitting in late 20 or 21. We've built in a 2% wage increase into the budget for 2020. We've decreased the vacancy factor by 0.5 point, which actually increases personnel expenses. So departments are filling positions on a more frequent basis. It doesn't take as long to fill a position. I've mentioned this a couple of times in other various presentations this year. We built a 7.1% increase in for healthcare for 2020. So we went self-insured in 2018. We had a bad year. We spend about $28 to $29 million a year on employee health care. Grants pay 30% of that. You'll see later, we spent $27 million in 2018. That was up from 26 million, I believe it was. I can't remember that. We'll see that number later on from 2017. And again, we only added a few positions in 2018, so most of that was just bad claims experience from being self-insured. Now, that's not saying we shouldn't have went self-insured, we just happened to have a bad year. High-cost claims, that sort of thing. Budget for the general fund, just shy of 280 million. That's a 1.6% increase over 2019. Again, a lot of that's being driven by a decrease in the amount of capital projects that we're funding for 2020. Again, 2% wage increase, 7% healthcare increase. 2020 is a presidential election year, as you all know, so we have a $600,000 expense in the election department to put on that election. That's an every other year expense. So that'll hit in 20, 22, 24, those even years. A $900,000 increase in the facilities maintenance items. So you remember about a year ago, we came to you and asked to roll or transfer a lot of ongoing maintenance items for the F&O budget into the general fund, things like tuck pointing and hazardous material abatement, roofing, paving, exterior seal. Those are kind of the major items. We only built 1.7 million into this year's budget in the general fund. Facilities director indicates she needs about 2.6 million for those particular items every year. So we built that in. And we built about a $400,000 increase into the IT maintenance budget. Items coming off systems, hardware coming off off of warranty, basically. So Jayco is going to be here, I think, later this week, so he can talk to you about that. Those are kind of the major things going on inside the general fund. We added 19 positions, but all of them were funded by either user fees or state or federal grants. There's a schedule in the presentation on that. There was actually one position added to the general fund that's in the Public Works Department, but that's funded by wastewater fees. So all the other ones are in departments or funds outside of the general fund. Again, we scaled way back on capital projects for 2020. There's a typo on this, as I see. It's 5.5 million for 2020, not 19. We've deferred many projects to 21 and 22. There's a schedule in here on that. There's some big money in big projects in 21. I would characterize the shortfall in 2020 as manageable. And if you think about it, if we have any combination of revenues coming in between 0.5 point and 0.75 percentage point over budget, or expenditures coming in at that same level under budget, some combination of the two, we're in the black. So I think that's reasonable. Again, 20 is not necessarily a concern to me. It's 21 and 22. We'll go on to slide 3, which is just a table of expenses by fund year to year. And again, at the very bottom is where we arrive at this 0.7% increase. And again, you'll see, large dollar variances in Homeland Security grants, roads. You'll have down at the very bottom in debt service. That's a $2 million decrease, but that's because we were before you earlier, or last month, to amend the debt service budget to provide $2 million to the Chapelton project. So it's going down year to year, but it should go down year to year. Slide 4 is a schedule of the 19 positions by fund and title. And again, no general fund money used to support these 19 positions. You'll see there's 5 positions to continue the rollout of the indigent defense statutes. The prosecuting attorney has a new state grant for victim witness program, so there's 5.5 positions there. Roads is adding 3 positions. Register of Deeds, Clerk Miller is adding 3 clerical staff in the automation fund. So that's all based or funded through user fees. Health grants, there's a slight, some reclassifications and added positions there. So again, point being here, no funding coming from the general fund. Slide 5, again, an overall view of all funds, all sources, all revenues, all expenses. Again, we come down to a 0.7% increase in expenses, 3% increase in revenues. And that's where we are. We're drawing down on fund balance of about $15 million overall across all funds. But again, some of those funds should be drawing down fund balance because they're grants. They should be spent down. Again, $1.7 million drawdown on fund balance being budgeted for the general fund. Slide 6, I always look to put slide 6 in here. It's just a graphical representation of the budget by major funds, if you will. The general fund you'll see is about 1/3 of the budget. Roads is about 20%. Mental health is about 1/3, and everything else combined is about 20%. It's just more of an informational slide than anything else. Moving on to slide number 7. This is now getting more into the detail of the general fund. And again, you'll see that revenues are going up about 2.9%, expenses are going up about 1.6%. I guess the point here, a few points actually. Property taxes, again, being budgeted to increase 3.5%. Intergovernmental. So intergovernmental, we're budgeting to go down by about $2.6 million. And let me preface all my comments before I get too deep into the weeds. The 19 amended numbers on the revenue side include $3.7 million of adjustments that I need to bring to you later this month. But I've rolled them into the budget anticipating that you'll approve them. They're primarily in PPT reimbursement. We budgeted $6 million. We got a supplemental payment in May of this year of $3.7 million. And we expect about a $4 million essential services tax distribution either this month or next month. So we're anticipating that revenue source will be about $7.7 million. Again, the budget's $6 million, so we'll be adjusting that upward by 1.7. We're doing fabulous in interest earnings. We budgeted $600,000. We're thinking it's going to be more along the lines of $1.4 million. Property taxes, we budgeted 3.5% increase for this year. It came in at 4.2, so that's about a little over $600,000 for property tax increases and another $600,000 for real estate transfer tax. The market's still going well, so we're experiencing some gains there. So again, back to governmental, we're scaling back the PPT reimbursement estimate from $6 million to, $7 million to $5 million. Again, kind of anticipating the economy slowing down, there's less surplus, there's less use tax being collected, that sort of thing. So we're being a little conservative on the revenue side there. Charges for services is kind of going the other way. We're budgeting an increase for real estate transfer tax for one more year. There's $1 million increase in there for dispatch and patrol contracts at the Sheriff's Department to pick up some costs related to collective bargaining agreement settlements and the 2% across the board increase, and $600,000 for revenue. This is a cost accounting entry for jail substance abuse programs. So substance abuse contracts brings people into the jail to put on the substance abuse program. They pay all the labor and all the contractual service costs. We're recording the cost of that and then an offsetting revenue. Much like indirect cost is kind of how to think about that. The indirect cost allocation, we know what that revenue is. That's based on increases from the 17 plan year, from the 16 plan year. We drop down to personnel. So personnel, we have a schedule in here. The next schedule is all the detail between, full-time wages, part-time wages, all the fringe benefit categories. It's about a 6% increase happening there. It's a combination of wage increases, collective bargaining agreements, 7% healthcare. And I'll continue to talk about healthcare because that's a large number. We're talking $29 million a year for healthcare. The repairs and maintenance line item, again, we talked about the two main items going on there between F&O and the IT department. Supplies and services, again, $600,000 for the election, $600,000 related to that jail substance abuse, and those are the big items there. There's a scattering of other increases in the various departments. And again, dropping down to the capital outlay, for the capital plan, we got about an $8 million decrease in projects for 20 from 2019. Again, we drop down to the bottom, we're showing a loss of the year of 1.7. Moving on to slide number 8, this is a breakdown of your personnel costs between all the different categories. You will see, again, wages are increasing by 6.4% for a variety of reasons that I mentioned earlier. Part-time wages, we've had some reclassifications, some eliminations that are happening this year in full-time positions becoming part-time positions and that sort of thing. The FICA's following the full-time wages. Again, drop down to employee health care, 7.7%. I mean, it is what it is, but it's a big number. There's $19 million, almost $20 million, $21 million in the general fund alone. It's just a big number. We had an increase in the pension contribution at the sheriff's department of about $1 million when we got the 18 actuarial plan in. We had a decrease on the general employee side. We had an experience study. So we had some favorable experience on the pension side. So we're showing an overall increase. You'll see as you look through the departmental detail that a lot of departments are having decreases. So I provided, Crystal, I don't know if you've had a chance to see it yet, all the departmental detail of all these line items so you can look at what's happening within a department as we go through all the budget meetings with the departments. So that's what's going on with inside the personnel side in the general fund. Slide 9 and 10, I've covered most of this already. Again, we're talking about property tax increases of 3.5%, followed by 2 and 1 in anticipation of a slowdown in the economy, a mild recession in late 20 or 21. We talked about the PPT reimbursement. We talked about charges for services increase. We talked about health care. We talked a little bit about wages going up. Slide number 10, we talked about supplies and commodities, repairs, all of these things I just talked about in a little bit more detail. It's just kind of putting it in narrative format for your reference. Slides 11 and 12 are graphical representations of revenues by source and expenditures by type. So I put that in every year so that you can get an idea of that, what's going on there. More informational than anything. Moving ahead to 13. So 13, 14, and 15 are now breakouts of the capital projects. So you got a capital plan with the budget a week or so ago. This is just kind of reiterating and summarizing capital expenses for the next 4 years. Again, you can see that we have $5.5 million of projects in 2020, $4 million in facilities, $1.5 million, $1.4 million in technology. You can see as you go out in further years, we're anticipating a baseline $10 million. That's kind of the new norm. 10 million could be a little bit more, but assume we're going to spend $10 million on capital between facilities and IT. Don't know what that's going to look like going out past 22, really, those fourth and fifth years are pretty difficult to try to guess what's going on out there. But you can see that, there's a lot of money in 21. There's almost $12 million in 21 that we need to figure out what we're going to do with. In page 14 is a breakout of the facilities number by building. Not necessarily individual project in a building. I was just trying to be kind of a condensed version. I've highlighted in red anything that's over $1 million. So you can see there's 6 projects on there over the next 2 years that exceed $1 million. There's about $2.9 million of expenses related to the jail over the next 5 years. There's the boathouse, there's moving the health department into Verkulen and replacing some rooftop units there, renovating the Southeast Health Building down at Harper and 10 Mile, renovation of the medical examiner's office. There's a lot of projects, and we've pushed. These projects is back year after year, and we feel we're at a point where we need to address them in 21 and 22, pardon me. And the next page is page 15, which is IT projects by department, if you will. And you can see there's, almost $11.8 million over the 5 years. Most of that money is in the IT budget or in the IT department. Jaco definitely is the person we want to talk to about that. He can explain that stuff. I cannot. Page 16, we put this in here every year. This is a graphical representation of the increases or decreases in taxable values. And you can see that we are not yet back to where we are or were in 2008. Of course, because of Headley, a lot of that's, you never get back what you lose. So, again, we do have a little cushion as we kind of anticipate entering a slowdown, in that at the top of this you'll see that our equalized value is 35.9 billion. Our taxable is 28.4. So we have a cushion there of about 26%, which is a good thing, because as property values go down, your taxable values don't go down necessarily as much, because you could still have inflationary increases. That's the old adage of, the value of my house went down, but my property taxes went up, kind of a thing. So we do have a little bit of a cushion there, and it's kind of highlighted on the next page. So I just thought it would be informational, helpful to put this in here to indicate what the effect of Headley is on the general fund. And it's about $4.2 million. So we're collecting about 97% of what the maximum allowed levy is, because we've had 4 or 5 rollbacks in a row, I'm sorry. So, more information than anything else, but that's kind of the effect of Headley on the general fund. So again, starting on page 18, kind of a looking ahead. What do things look like going into 21 and 22 and beyond? Not very good. And again, we're projecting only a 2% increase in property values. That's basically an inflationary increase in 21. A little bit of a decline in 22. We don't know what the recession is going to be. We're being conservative on the revenue side. Again, the Federal Reserve is expected to lower rates once more this year. If we get into a further slowdown, recession, they'll most likely reduce interest rates more in the next couple of years, I would anticipate. And again, if you think about if you're investing at, say, 3%, and they cut rates by a quarter of a point, that's an 8.3% decrease in your actual return. So if you cut it 2 or 3 times, now you're talking 10 or 15% decrease in interest. Again, if the real estate market starts to tail off, then we have, reductions in real estate transfer tax. Curiously enough, recording fees don't necessarily track that way because, lower interest rate environment, people are refinancing. So that's just recording documents, not, necessarily the transfer tax of properties exchanging hands. We will be losing rent revenue from the state in the Verkulen building and Majestic Center in Warren in 2021. That's about $1.6 million. That's all been factored into our numbers. And again, even though the pension fund is well funded at about 97%, there's a slide on that coming up, we could easily have an increase in our pension contribution in 21, 22, 23, because as you know, what happens in the market in 1 year doesn't affect our contribution for 2 years. So again, we've got some revenue issues that I think are going to, that we're going to have to address. Again, healthcare, $27 million in 2018. That was up 2.2 million from 2017. We only added 16 positions in 2018, so that's at 13,000 apiece. That's not a lot of money out of that $2 million increase. In the last bullet point on page 19 is more of an informational piece than anything else. Picked out 5 of the most common, biggest, largest revenue sources in the general fund. Those total $161 million. That's 58% of all the revenues in the general fund, which could be directly impacted in a negative way in a recessionary, economy. So we've factored in changes or decreases in property taxes, transfer tax, and interest. We haven't really touched revenue sharing or liquor tax. So revenue sharing is always on the chopping block in my mind. I mean, Commissioner Myjack has mentioned that. He's been here a long time, so is Commissioner Brown. So the state could arbitrarily cut that if they so wish. Slide 20 is a bar graph of housing starts. We've leveled off at about 1,900 a year. We're at 1,400 through last week. That's from SEMCOG. Their data lags a little bit. So things are going good now. I still don't really anticipate things going very well in the next couple of years. 21, 22, and 23 are all schedules that you've seen before, so there's a bit of good news, I guess. I'll try to characterize it as that, and that we have a pretty low debt load. So, and we have some debt service falling off in 2023, some more relief in 26. So I'd like to put this in here so folks get an idea of what our debt service needs are. Slide 22 is just a line graph of kind of giving you an idea when those particular issues are retired. Page 23 is a principal retirement schedule by bond issue. So you see, other than the retiree health care issue, we have 6 outstanding issues at the end of 19, or moving on to 24. So we get into a little bit better news again. This is just a schedule of funding progress for the pension fund. At the end of 2018, on an actuarial basis, we were just shy of 97%. We're still well funded. We do have some deferred losses that we need to absorb in the next 4 years. There's about $62 million of those. We're having a good investment year so far this year, though, so that's offsetting some losses from late 18. But those impacts are hard to gauge. But we do have some losses we need to absorb. Moving on to page 25, this is the retiree healthcare trust fund, excluding roads, because they have their own retiree healthcare plan. And you can see that as of the end of 16, which is the last year we have a valuation for, at this point in time, we were about 96% funded. Now, that includes the assets that the bond proceeds we put into that intermediate trust. So I've highlighted those or noted those with an asterisk, but, so we were well-funded. You'll see in 2013, the unfunded liability was $262.6 million. That's what we issued the bonds for, to cover that liability, but the liability grows every year as well. So that's why we're not what you would think, you might think we should be 100%. Well, we bonded for a liability in 13, but we didn't do it until 15. So, but we're still well-funded, I guess is the point. And Schedule 26, or page 26, is a schedule of the funding progress for the retiree healthcare plan at the roads. And again, they've been making additional contributions for a number of years now, and they continue to gain ground on their funding status. And at the end of 16, again, they were about 66% funded. So, you know, they're making some good strides toward their funding ratio. And the last slide is just a look at where we will be with our fund balance. I normally go out 10 years. I didn't want to go out 10 years. At this point, there's no need to go out 10 years because we need to look at 21 and 22. And you'll see that at the end of 2019, we're still budgeting a loss of about $5 million. I don't expect that to be the case at the end of 19, much as I did in October of last year. I will come back to you with a forecast for the general fund as of 9/30. And I think that number is, depending on what we do with capital projects, is going to be -2 to +2, somewhere in that neighborhood. We originally started with a -8. If you look back, we were at -8.8. So I think we're going to land somewhere between -2 and +2. So I think that fund balance is going to be somewhere north of that 20.3%, maybe 21, 21 and a half, 22. In 2020, we're right still in that 19% or 19-20% range. Start looking at 21 and 22, depending on how if we're right, it's not good. If I'm wrong, if Steve and I are wrong on our revenue forecasts or revenue estimates, great. If we're not, not so great. And so it gives us some time to adjust, but we need to, you know, need to be thinking about it. So.
Well, there are a lot of questions.
I'm sure there are.
Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve, for an excellent presentation. It was very good and a lot of work. Thanks to you and your staff for putting it together.
Yeah, if I may interrupt just for a minute? Go ahead and ask your question.
Go ahead.
So, everybody knows Steve Adair, Dave Steitler, and Susie Caparucio. They are the folks that put the budget together, so I have to give kudos to them. I apologize for not doing it at the beginning of the presentation, but they're the backbone of putting that document together, so.
We appreciate it, and having some of the visual images, too, about reflecting what the numbers say, too, also helps. It's just a good document, and a lot of time and effort, and a sober assessment of where we're at with our budget, too, and that's always important. You know, so basically our budget, our general fund budget, basically double of what it was last year due to the recent contract negotiations. That's basically what the driver. I mean, last year how much were we over the general fund budget up from the year before that? It was under 1%, wasn't it? Last year's general fund budget over the year before?
I don't remember, Commissioner, I can't remember.
I think it was nearly flat. It was very close. And that was credit to everybody doing their jobs, right?
Yeah, I'll go back and, I'm sure I have slides from last year. We made some adjustments.
Just send me or send the board, just what it's been over the trend.
Yeah.
Just a trend line, because it shows good work that's been done, and that's important, and trying to keep that number as low as possible. The 19 deputies that we hired, were those last year's budget that we brought on?
the 19, we hired 13.
13, okay, 13, all right.
Yeah, so we hired 13, that was in this year's budget. But again, we won't start to see the effect of those until the fourth quarter of this year. It takes 6 to 9 months to get them onboarded through the academy. They have 3 months of basically on-the-job training, field training, if you will.
Okay.
So we won't, and we haven't even had a full pay period hit in the fourth quarter yet this year, so.
Okay. And some of the questions I had noted down, I got answered later on. The cost of employee benefits, as a generality, is 7%, is that what it is now? The cost of employee benefits as a percentage of salary,
About 60,
what is it?
about 60.
60%. And what was it before the defined benefit plan went away? It was over
Somewhere
100.
in that neighborhood, I'll go back and.
I would just, okay.
What's happening, Commissioner, is that the defined benefit plan's only been closed for 3 years, so we haven't seen the full impact of that, because we
Okay,
still have
true.
a large number of employees that are accruing benefits.
True, that's right, okay.
So
thank you.
we haven't seen the full impact of that yet.
All right, that's all passed. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Steve, the mention of the rollback a couple of times, is this a prelude to a Headley override?
No,
It's not on?
no, I haven't had any discussions. It's more informational than anything.
Okay,
It's more informational than anything.
okay.
Because you think about it, you think, oh, we had a rollback, it's only .9926, but we've had 5 in a row, and it compounds on itself every year. So,
Okay, and you have the budget with you?
I do.
Would you go to the addendums, all the addendums, really, it looks like. The first column on all of these say 2019 salary range, is that supposed to be 2020? Or, because it says fiscal year ending December 31st, 2020.
I think those are 19, aren't they?
They are 19. The 2020 is for the column on the right, which is the actual number of positions.
Well, that's not the same thing as the minimum and maximum range.
Yeah, we will not know what those maximum ranges are quite yet until HR puts together all their paperwork.
We've projected 2%, but we haven't settled any contracts for 2020 yet.
Okay, so even with the compensation study,
Those are rolled in.
you're still projecting 2% total for the minimum, maximum change?
That's what we built in, yes.
Because I thought maybe that's what explained the, especially in the general fund, the 6.3% in the personnel. Because I thought, well, it's not going to be in the wage increases, because we're not going to negotiate a 6.3% wage increase for the employees, generally speaking.
No, we got 2 built in, 0.5% decrease in the vacancy factor. In the remainder, it's about $3 million as a result of the wage compensation study, if you want to call it that.
So if that's changing by 2%, I don't understand how the personnel overall is changing by 6.3.
So you got 2.5, you got folks working their way through step increments from this year to next, so we've budgeted, I don't know what it is, because I don't know how many, off the top of my head, how many positions there are, but you do have folks that are now in a step grade system, obviously, because they got new salary tables, so we're budgeting up to 3 steps, if you will, for some positions, not every position. So you got that going on, and then the impact from the wage or compensation study that we built into 19 rolling forward into 20 as well. So that's, if you think about 2.5 versus 6, then you've got about 3 or 4% as a result of the compensation study.
At a time where we're heading into financial turmoil.
We need to talk
Okay.
about staffing levels.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Gillette.
Thank you, Chair. Hey, Steve, thanks again for this very comprehensive report. I very much appreciate it. Just have a couple questions. One has to do with roads. On slide number 3, you show roads going from 163.5 million to, 158.2 million approximately. I thought that the road funding increase that the legislature had implemented was slowly being phased in, and that we are getting more money for roads as the last couple of years have gone by, including moving forward. Does that...
This is on the expense side, so I'd have to look at their list of projects, and I'll get back with you on that.
Okay, so this is on the expense side.
This is on the expense side.
Because in theory, when they implemented the gas tax increase a couple of years ago and the registration fee increases, initially only a small percent was going toward the actual roads, and it's been ramping up allegedly.
Yeah.
So I would imagine we're going to spend that money, but, so the expenses, I would imagine, would go up. And I think you just, did a good job of answering my other question. With the pay increases of the 6.3%, or whatever it might be, that doesn't even reflect the 7% in healthcare costs. Are there any wage increases that we're looking at that are not recommended by our wage study? Are there any other increases built into this proposed budget?
No, not other than the 2%.
Just the 2%?
Just the 2%. More of an inflationary.
Okay, so nothing in there then is above that. But I thought there would be some that, based on our wage and compensation study, right? Or let's call it wage study, not compensation study. You mentioned we made those adjustments.
So we rolled those into 19.
Okay.
And then we just assumed another 2% inflationary impact on top of that.
Okay.
Across the board.
Okay. Those are the only questions I have off the top of my head. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Chair Smith?
Thank you. Hi, Steve. Let me ask you, I have a couple little questions about, one of them is the self-insurance thing, and you said last year was a bad year. Is there a point, I don't know what we were paying as a percentage of our budget before we went to self-insurance. Do you remember what that number was before we were self-insured? I think right now it's 7.7, you said?
It went up by 7.7.
It went up by 7.7.
Yeah, if you look at you look at that line item, it's roughly a quarter of the budget.
So I guess my question is there a snapshot of years that we look at after so long and realize theoretically we should benefit, right, by doing this?
In theory, we should benefit.
But do we get to a point ever in a few years, or is there a indicator at 2025 that we'll look back and say,
I think you look back after 2 or 3. I don't think you wait quite that long.
That's what I'm wondering, when that happens.
Exactly.
Okay. So that's on the
it's on the radar. Because what I didn't mention earlier was, and I don't have the numbers back yet, is I've requested claims data for the first 7 months of this year versus the first 7 months of last year to see where we're headed. Are we still on a bad year this year, or was 18 an anomaly? It was the first year.
And what'd you find?
I don't have the numbers yet.
Oh, all right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't have the 19 numbers yet.
So someone was, I think Commissioner Brown was talking about the OT and the sheriff department and the positions, and I know you had mentioned even back last year that we wouldn't really know that until, it wouldn't really show the effects until almost at the end of this year.
Right.
Is that, I know you had an approximate idea of what it should save in overtime. Is that built into next year on what you think it's going to save, or is that just?
It's already built, yeah.
Okay. So your estimate is into next year's overtime, whatever might be
Right.
reductions?
We built an estimate into this year as well, and a further reduction into 2020.
Great. Election expenses, I just was wondering if, we had talked about, and you even look like you're going to this, right? The capital projects starting to even out at, 10 million a year. Just wondering if that's a thought for elections, since it's every other year, instead of 600,000 one year and zero the next, if we would.
We could. We have had an elections revolving fund for years here. It was never, it's an internal service fund, it's not in the budget. And for years, we would fund that more evenly, so 300,000 or whatever it was. And we built up a fund balance there. Now we've drawn down on the fund balance, and now it's extinguished. So is there benefit to putting the cost of an election in the general fund? If you ask me, I think it is. Because you can look at the elections department and say, oh, here it is. It costs 600,000 in a presidential year, maybe 400,000 in a gubernatorial year. Could we revert back to having an internal service fund? And it doesn't really serve anything internally other than one department, so it doesn't really meet the definition of an internal service fund either.
It just seems like with,
You go, every
that
other
kind of
year,
a-
you're gonna have
Right.
a $400,000 or $600,000 increase in the budget, which
Yep.
is what it is.
The Verculen building, I see a $4.2 million capital outlay for the Verculen building. Do you have any idea what that is? I know we're losing 1.8 or something like that, or 1.6.
So what that is, let me get, let's see, where is, that is moving the health department from the building they're in now into the space that the state
Vacated?
vacates, renovating that area and then replacing some rooftop units at the same time.
Okay.
And then demolish the health department building.
All right, so that,
Other than,
that
the alternative,
4.2 is part of the demolishing of the health department building also?
pardon?
That 4.2 million or whatever I saw, is that?
No, I think that was
That's
separate.
separate?
Yeah, that was separate.
Okay.
I believe. So the alternative is leave the health department where they're at and then replace all the rooftop units at the health department and renovate that building.
There's no chance, obviously, of finding substitute renters for that space?
No, we've looked at that. Plus we got the old health department building that probably needs to be torn down.
Okay. And then my last question, all of this kind of addendum that shows full-time wages, part-time wages, all in different departments, I think I remember this was always part of the budget, and now it's a separate sheet. Is there a reason behind that?
So I like personnel this is kind of going back to what we did a few years ago. So if you got personnel as one number. You can clearly see that personnel is $153 million in the general fund. This is more of a worksheet for everybody else. I would like to then redo this and incorporate, not necessarily by department, but by type into the budget narrative. So the public can see it as well. So I like one number. You can clearly identify it. You know what percentage of the total budget it is. You can go to supplemental schedules, which will be in the budget document, to calculate percentage rates and that sort of thing.
Right. I mean, I'd like to see this in even the back part of it, right?
Oh, the
I mean, all
supplemental
of it.
schedule?
Yeah, I mean, if you want the public to see
Yeah.
everything, I mean, you could, the one number thing is
Do it
great
as an
for.
appendix.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Carabelli?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the report. A couple of questions to ask you. The $5 million for capital projects, that's new money going into it? Is that what you're saying, new projects?
It's a new project. Yeah, there's,
Okay, because the reason why I'm asking, because there's carryover projects that we're budgeting.
yeah, these are just new projects. So we funded a number of projects so far.
Okay, so these are additional to the $2.5 million that I could see that are carryovers on my notes. So now I'm at, let's just say, $7.5 million, and that doesn't include all the stuff we've approved throughout the year here, even using that emergency fund to pay for some of the things that were happening. I want to have an understanding, when you say capital project, this is just additional to
This is
the
new projects.
ongoing stuff?
New
that we have
projects.
to finish paying, which is...
New projects.
Is it, am I right about $2.5 million? If you could find out, that'd be...
Well, again, when I come to you later this month or early November with the third quarter financial report, you'll have a capital plan update. So I'll know what that number is.
Okay.
Yep.
Because it's not the $5 million, $4.5 million, it's much more.
This is, yeah, everything in that 5-year plan is new money.
That's
New money
additional-
over
new
and
additional
above what's
projects.
still in progress from last year and what's been funded for this year.
To talk about the healthcare, and I know it's been mentioned, and is somebody going to be able to get us some information of what we were at when we paid for regular insurance before we were self-insured? And then to find out what is our contract for the administration of this policy? Like, is it up? Is it coming up for renewal? Is it for the admin of it? Is this?
Yeah, the admin fees and stop-loss fees?
Right, so, being that it's not going the way that we had planned, I think it's something that we would like to see, instead of adding these increases, and we know it costs, but why is it costing? And is it a better way to do it, I guess? So I just would ask that.
And keep in mind, Commissioners, that
I know, but,
if we had remained fully insured in 2018, the carriers would look at our experience and roll that in to premium rates at some point in the future. Yeah, and so it may have hit us in 2018 because we're self-insured. If we remain fully insured, it may not hit until 2020, because they would have just raised the rates. And they, so.
you had mentioned about the new employees will be covered by grants, and we seem to talk about this every year, that they're grant-approved employees, and it's just to that grant. And yet, I've never heard of, through attrition, of when that grant goes away, that these employees are let go, or through attrition going to another department. So again, these are new employees going on to the roles, grant or not. The deal is that no one's ever come back, and we ask you every year, okay, is it in their contract or agreement that it's only for the lifespan of this grant? And any commissioner helped me remember that they came back and said, hey, 3 employees got let go because that grant expired. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, I can tell you, for example, Secondary Road Patrol, so that's in the news now because the governor cut it from the budget. We have 4 people in that program. Now, fortunately, 3 of those folks are deputies, and they have more than 3 deputy vacancies in other areas, so there's landing spots for those. But I had a conversation with the Sheriff's Department last Thursday, about those positions need to be eliminated.
Okay,
And
this
that
is stuff
program, in
we're
that
not
program,
hearing.
they have 4 now, for example, Commissioner. In years past, at one point in time, we had 7, I'll turn to Gary, there was 7 at one point, or more.
I don't remember.
Yeah, so 7 or more. So that program has been reduced over time. I couldn't tell you what the rest of the grants are.
You understand my
I understand exactly
concern,
where you're
because
coming
other
from.
than you right now is telling that they got absorbed through, to the Sheriff's Department. I haven't heard.
Right.
And again, we always say grant only, and the next thing you know, no one's, the budget didn't change for the next year, and it's like, hang on, these grants don't go forever. So that's a concern. And the other question I ask every year, the contracts that we have for services, from sheriff or whatever it may be, there's supposed to be a study saying, yes, we are fully covering all of our costs, and yet I haven't seen that. Has any other commissioner seen an updated study on this?
So let me address that for you. So now that this is prepared, we're talking about this, we know what all the impacts of the settlement of the union contracts are, because we just settled the last one with the deputies in September. Now we can go back and analyze what's going on. We got indirect costs. As you know, we've rolled indirect costs into the budget for the first time, really starting in 2020. So we can look to see if our indirect or overhead charge has been covering what our actual costs are. So that will be forthcoming through my office as well.
Okay, then the last bit I have for you at this time is, did the county refinance any bonds, not the Department of, not the drain office, the county itself, any of our bonds get refinanced this year?
No.
No. The bonds that were refinanced by the drain office, are those savings going back to those districts, or are those going back into the general fund?
Back to the districts.
So all those savings are going back to those particular
Yeah.
districts? Okay, that's all I have right now, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Commissioner Myjack?
Thanks for coming here today, Steve. So a couple questions. Personal property taxes, I always ask this to you. So are we going to be fully reimbursed this year?
I expect to this year.
You expect to?
This year,
We have been up till this point.
yes.
that correct?
We've had surplus distributions.
Gotcha.
So we've been around that $7 million range every year, but as the economy slows, use tax, people aren't leasing as many vehicles, that sort of thing. So you might get back to a point, when we roll out to 2022, we've scaled back that reimbursement to $4 million. which is
Okay.
kind of what we estimate to be a essential services distribution.
Okay,
Remains
so,
to be seen. I mean, you never know what the state's going to do.
so I just got a question. I've been here for a while on the Board of Commissioners since the mid-90s, and I pretty much, as I recall it, when Dave Deagle was Director of Finance, from the mid-90s to maybe 2006, I'm pretty sure we had balanced budget with surpluses from what I recall. And then the Great Recession happened 2006 to 2009, and we had to cut a lot, and we had to raise some money. And then, as I look at it, we've gone through this recovery period since 2010 until now. So the question I have is, how are we able to, through that history, last 20, 25 years, how were you able to get surpluses at that time period when I first started, when you were finance, not when you weren't director? And why in the last 10 years, if times are supposed to be good, how come we haven't done a better job to build up a surplus, and times are good and we still have deficits going on here?
I would say we had deferred maintenance, and if you think about the late 90s, early 2000s,
Right.
we had, I would say, incredible growth in property
Right.
values. So we were growing 6, 7, 8% a year. Now we're 3, 2, 4.
And Headley didn't hurt us as bad.
Back then, we weren't even levying the max.
Right,
We were at 4.2.
right, 4.2,
But we
right.
had so much property tax growth,
Right.
that's how we were able to start funding retiree health care.
Gotcha.
And so now we have rollbacks, and because the
So-
economy's doing great, housing, the market's
Right.
great, sales are great, but we have a rollback because,
But we've
Of
never been
uncapping.
able to, in the last 10 years or 5 years, able to get above that, as far as having surpluses again.
we had surpluses in the early part of the 2011, 12, 13, but then we funded healthcare again. We funded
Right.
retiree healthcare.
Right.
So remember, we put that $59 million aside in 2015.
Okay, so then, I mean, it seems like there's not much, and correct me if I'm wrong with anything here, it seems like we can't do much on the revenue side. It's pretty flat here from 2020 to 2022, and revenues get negatively affected by recession. So I was looking here at on page 27, the personnel expenses, I'm just looking at here how much they've gone up. That's gone up $6 million from 2020 to 2022. And the other category under expenses that have gone up is the capital outlay capital plan by about $5 million. So that's $11 million in added costs from there. And this is a big concern, deficit 1.7 million for 2020, 12.2 for 2021, 14.5 for 2022. And I don't know, I mean, you're the finance guy, why are we brought budgets like this? Why can't you and the executive's office get together, say, for this year, and have brought us numbers for, say, a balanced budget, in short?
For this year, for 2020?
Yeah, because again, we raised the taxes of the county back, 10 years ago. We can't do anything to increase the revenue side from page 27, as I understand it, unless other things happen, and just...
Yeah, I guess in 2020, again, I think that's a manageable number. I think we could likely come in the black in that number. Again, 21 and 22. And those are forecasts, those aren't budgets, those are forecasts.
Right, but those are not good.
Those are not good.
Not good.
No,
And if
and-
times are supposed to be good now, why aren't our numbers better? I mean, you look here, the fund balance, that's going to be at 24.5 million. That goes fast. I was here, again, 10 years ago, and I saw the fund balance go down very fast in a matter of a few years.
Well, and that's
So
what's
these-
happening here again.
Yeah, so these
Again, I
numbers,
think we've made strides in making our wages more competitive. We need to look at staffing.
you're saying we're overstaffed in the county to reduce
I'm not
personnel
necessarily
costs?
saying that in every department, but I think you need to look at it. If every quarter I send you a
Right.
list of vacant positions, for example. There's
And that's how
100
we...
to 150 positions.
Right, and that's how we helped to get through the deficit 10 years ago, was we did it through many ways. One way was eliminated the jobs through attrition. So maybe we'll have to go back to that to get the numbers balanced. But just speaking off the cuff here, looking on page 27, I mean, I would say the personnel cost would be one area to look at to cut through attrition, and then maybe capital projects here. I mean, I don't know, I'm just throwing the numbers out. You have projects on one of these pages, and you just can't afford them all. I mean, we're in deficit, we can't continue to go in deficit, and if that's the case, we have to find areas to cut. Am I wrong in any of
No,
those
you're
areas?
not wrong in any of that, Commissioner.
It's
Not
not
wrong
too
in
much.
any of that.
It's not too much this year, 1.7, let's try and find the money for that and balance it, but the next 2 years is very serious for all of us up here. So, that's all I have on that. But
And myself and the exec's office included, everybody.
I mean, this makes me worry,
I mean, we could be all wet with our revenue forecasts. I'd rather be conservative than be wrong.
Right.
I mean, we're naturally conservative by nature, so, maybe there's, maybe the recession or whatever, the slowdown is not as bad as what folks are,
Let's hope it's not. I mean,
but I mean, we're on a 10-year wave here, so.
we're just gonna have to cut some capital project. I'm looking for the page here. I mean, which page? I was just on 27.
Oops.
Those forecasts.
Well, yeah, I was gonna look for specific projects in general, but, I mean, you just can't afford it. You just gotta say, no, the money's not there, and hold off to another year, or just prioritize. There's needs and wants, and you just can't, there's no way you can have everything you want. Is the way I look at it, if we're in
Right.
deficit. And again, we're in 2020, so 1.7 is, if it's a deficit, that's a lot better than 12 or 14 million. And that's very serious, and I hope we're all on the same boat.
For costs, the way you need to do it, I understand that. But now it sheds a different light on these district courts of just shy of $3 million in 2020 to be subsidized by the rest of the county taxpayers. So I'm looking at this, and before I jump up and down, I want to understand what that charge is and what it's being utilized for at the county. That makes sense. All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Gillette.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks again, Steve. Just a quick question on Commissioner Calabelli's question. I guess, I think he was trying to ask him, maybe I was just trying to interpret, are we subsidizing the district courts? After we move all the monies around and so forth, and,
Yeah, we have been, the district courts have not, revenues in the district courts have not covered expenses in the district courts.
forever, essentially?
Yeah, I hate to use the word forever, but for a long time.
Okay.
And so even if we assess indirect cost charges to them, that's a cost-neutral proposition to the general fund. So if you back that out, if you look at prior years.
Dude, is that, I know you're a Macomb County employee, but is that common across the state? Are most district courts essentially subsidized, or do you not know?
I don't know.
Okay.
I think it varies. I would expect it's going to vary,
Okay.
depending on the jurisdiction. You may find that county district courts are subsidized by the funding unit, maybe locals aren't, but I don't really
And
know.
no, I think locals end up too, a lot of times, the rural ones are going to be subsidized,
Yeah.
And that's what the setup was supposed to be here back when it was all farmland. That's why they belong to the county. But it isn't all farmland anymore. It's kind of it's an issue that I've been bothered by for years. The New Baltimore's bigger than the cities down south of it. But in the rural counties, they have to subsidize. There isn't enough people to cover them.
Steve, you have any idea how much the general fund or the county essentially is subsidizing the district courts? I may never have broken that down.
I would point you to, yeah, I would point you, if you go to pages C23 and C24 of the budget.
Okay.
Look at the far left-hand columns, 2017 and 2018. Those are actual audited numbers.
Okay.
So you'll see in New Baltimore that in 2013, and those years do not have this indirect cost built into them.
Okay.
So you'll see in 2017, expenses were 660,000, or I'm sorry, revenues were 660,000, expenses were 1.3 million. So they reported a loss, basically, of 600,000. Next year, it was just shy of 600. Same, you could go over and look at the Romeo Court, a couple $100,000 a year, excess of expenses over revenues.
But-
So that's,
Is that, are there any other district courts that we are subsidizing?
no, those are the only two. We have Romeo and New Baltimore.
Okay, how do the other courts then fund themselves? Is it just their typical fines, fees, and court
At the
costs?
local level? Yeah,
Point of information.
I don't know the
The
structure necessarily
municipalities
local
are in
cities.
charge of those.
A better flow of prisoners, or essentially?
Yeah, I know.
Okay. The next question I have is, at any given time, do you have any idea what percentage of budgeted positions are vacant at any particular time in general? Is it 5%, 10%, 2%, 20%?
I'll tell you, it's somewhere around 10.
It's about 10%
If
of
you
vacant.
look- Again, if you go back to every quarterly report, there's a schedule of vacant positions.
Okay.
So it's somewhere north of 100, maybe 150, I'd have to look back myself.
Okay, and is
So maybe
that,
it's 5%, 150, 2,500, so maybe it's not 10%, maybe it's more between 5 and 7.5.
and is that one of the reasons why oftentimes at the end of the year, we didn't spend as much as we expected because not all those vacant positions were filled at any one time, and therefore,
Exactly.
okay.
Mental health tends to run a large number of that, a large portion of that total vacancies are in mental health.
Is it,
What they do is they factor in a 20% turnover factor. So they'll take all their positions and then they'll just budget 80% of that number, because they always have these vacancies.
I mean, does it tend to work out, are they accurate over time, or no, in mental health, with the assessment of their turnover and that sort of
Yeah, they
thing?
have. I'll get you the number, I don't know off the top of my head,
Okay.
Commissioner.
Is there any departments that like that have larger number of vacant positions as a percent of their overall?
JJC. Yeah,
JKC?
JJC.
Oh,
So
JJ.
We budget for 100 kids.
Uh-huh.
So but we have a 20% turnover factor.
Steve, I think you're no longer at the microphone.
But those aren't
Thank you.
positions, Steve, those are kids who are in the,
Yeah, but we have staffing for 100 kids, we have 40 or 50.
okay?
So what we do is we have a 20% turnover factor. We started that in the 19 budget, where we looked back the last few years prior to that, and we looked at what the actual salary and benefit expense was as a percentage of the budget when we didn't have a turnover factor, and it was around 75 or something, but we wanted to leave them a little cushion, so I think we have a 20% turnover factor in the child care fund. Those two are the ones that come to my mind.
What about, I would imagine, I would think a larger department, I mean, does the sheriff department have a pretty large turnover? Or is it?
It varies from
average?
year to year. In the general fund, we have a 3% turnover factor.
Okay.
3.5 this year, we budgeted 3 for next year, but that's just as the fund in total. Some departments are fully staffed, don't have much turnover. My office is one of those.
Right.
We don't have a lot of turnover,
Right.
so.
So Commissioner Majek, Commissioner Brown, and maybe some others remember some of the challenges the county faced when the Great Recession really kicked in. I would imagine that not filling some of those vacant positions was, one of the things that the county implemented, out of the
Yeah, we
gate.
implemented a number of things, but yeah, hiring freeze and some other things.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Steve, very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I want to clarify on something when I say sometimes cities do subsidize. Courts will say they make money, but they're a collection agency, so that doesn't take into account the cost of the police officers that are out writing the tickets. So if they're out spending all their time writing the tickets and the city's paying for them, but the revenue just goes to the court, then from that perspective, they would be a money-making.
And I believe also some of the fees that are collected at the courts go to the state. So we have staff that
Right.
have to run the court.
The
and-
system that we have may not, it may create a different type of incentive with regard to how much you pay to have officers writing tickets. If the revenue goes here, are the tickets being written, you know?
Right, so I would
I
say-
suspect that all that's in play because it's a different system.
Yeah, so just because the revenues are not equaling the expenses isn't necessarily something that's totally under the court's control.
Right. Commissioner Sauger.
Yeah, Steve, on page 18, I'm just curious, the state of Michigan is going to vacate a couple of places, one being the Verkulen building and also the Majestic Center that's down in Warren. What are they taking out?
They're just moving all their people. They're building a new facility at Gratiot and Hall Road, I think it is, for the folks that are over at the Verkulen building. I think they're calling it a super center, I think, something like that. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what they're doing with the people down in Warren, but they're moving them to another facility someplace.
'Cause that's quite a big facility down there they're going to vacate. Now, just
Yeah, they wanted more space, more parking spaces.
because people are going to start asking me, and they're going to start asking
Yeah, I'm
Audrey,
not sure where they're
what's going
going,
down there.
Well, the county business is still staying.
Yeah, the health
The
department's
county's
staying
going to stay
there.
there?
Health department's staying. It's the state of, Department of Human Services.
Okay, all right, thank
Yeah,
you.
the state, or we are staying there.
Thank you.
Okay, I need a motion to receive and file, moved by Romano, supported by Leonetti. Please vote. Motion passes 12-0. New business. Any new business? Seeing none. Oh, I almost got it out. I almost shut him down. Chair Smith.
Tomorrow, I just wanted to point out that FAN is having their Oktoberfest, and we all are familiar with FAN and what they do for the families of opioid victims, their families, and everything like that. They really do a nice job of supporting them. They're having a big fundraiser tomorrow night at Penna's of Sterling. So if anybody can find their way to going, it's $125 a ticket, and it includes an awful lot of good stuff. Oh yeah, I'm going to get right on that. Joe said he'd buy everybody a ticket. I did. Yep, it's what you sound like. Thank you.
Thank you. And Butte, Montana is expecting 4 inches of snow this week. With that, public participation. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, can I do? Chair Duge. I'm Chair. Commissioner Duge.
Thank you. I see the drugs finally kicked in. I just wanted to report that I was at that Centennial for concert yesterday. It lasted a little over 2 hours. It was a marvelous show, and I got a lot of nice commentary, very positive commentary that the Board of Commissioners and other organizations supported the Honduras Centennial, and I wanted to tell everybody that I appreciate your approval of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Mike?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to report, I took part in Manufacturing Day in Macomb County on Friday. So took a tour of Taurus Industry in Sterling Heights. They make CNC machines in the manufacturing sector, and it was great. It was very interesting. They also had about 30 students from Stevenson High School there, and also Kurt from the PED office. So thank you.
How did you, can I ask you a question about it? How'd you know about it?
Courtney in our board office let me know. Yeah, got an email, and they actually have, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Courtney, I know you're in there, 70 facilities in Macomb County host it, and you saw in the paper, I think they had it, I can't remember so they have it at every area they might have it, so for you folks next year, if you want to do some in Warren, Andre, they'll have some in Warren that you can look at, or so on and so forth, so thanks. Yep.
Thank you. Does anyone else? Okay. Hearing of the public. Seeing none, we'll close hearing of the public. Move to adjourn by Drollet, supported by Duge. Please vote. And it's Drollet. No, we're adjourned.